here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's April 10th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainhong.
Happy Monday, everyone!
Happy Monday!
Woo!
And Walter Lee.
Always lovely to be here.
All right, and both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Now, we're going to start with our news feed. A news feed which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. A finance institute on Sunday found that Korea's super rich had an average total assets worth $24 million US. Most of them were corporate executives with an MBTI type of ESTJ, which is often categorized as a leader type, driven with realistic thoughts. And the annual report also found average net assets of the super rich had fallen by around $3.7 million from last year. And with the world's eyes on K-dramas, it's getting harder for people to get away with cursing in Korean abroad. That's according to Bloomberg, which recently reported how popular Korean drama series like Squid Game and The Glory have taught many people Korean swear words. The report also mentioned the power of K-dramas and its growing influence to the point that even curse words are becoming viral. Moving on, recently an online post criticizing Millennials and Gen Zs who complained that they're the least fortunate generation went viral. The post was written by supposed Gen 586, which refers to Korean in their 50s and 60s, and it said unlike kids these days, this generation had to work 6 days a week, couldn't really use paid vacation, and even went through the IMF crisis, meaning their jobs were at risk. Immediately, young netizens retaliated, saying that the older generation had more hope back then because it was still easier for them to get a job and grow their assets. And if we go a bit deeper into the third hashtag, this particular online post drew a lot of reactions. Both generations claimed that the other had it much easier, and a job portal site found that 2 out of 5 companies had workers quit their jobs after they experienced conflicts from big generation gaps. More than 8 out of 10 of those who quit were from the generation Millennials and Gen Z. So let's expand the newsfeed here to the studio. Walter, have you ever experienced age-related conflicts at the workplace?
Well, listen, I've worked in many different jobs. You name it, I've probably worked in it at one point in my life. And yes, of course, I've had my conflicts. I mean, I worked with children. I've had conflicts with children before. Tony, the red crayon and the green crayon do not taste the same. They are crayons.
How could you possibly have conflict with children? Maybe it's you, not them.
I think it's 100% them. Tony. Anyway, I don't think it is an age generation thing. I think it's a personality thing because you can have a stubborn old person and a stubborn 5-year-old Tony.
Or someone like Walter.
Or me. However, yeah, for me, it comes down to personality. Obviously, people will say personality is linked with your age as well as your generation. However, these days, now I'm a little more mature. I, just keep silent. I think that silence is sometimes better than yelling at somebody, but yes, I have had my conflicts.
And you will now understand why Tony was trying to differentiate the taste of different colors.
They're the same.
But at the workplace, there are still a lot of people that experience age-related conflicts.
Absolutely.
Even though, as you mentioned, it's a really great point that it might have to do with personality. There are different understandings because we grew up from such different environments, right, Cheska? So would you like to give us any tips for people who are facing intergenerational gap conflicts out there?
So I'm not as aggressive as Walter has been, but I've had many accounts from my friends who work in Korean companies that have expressly shared these unfortunate happenings.
Right.
And what I've noticed is that, as you said, this type of conflict isn't just about age, because it happens within even our generation too, with juniors. So it is very omnipresent, and as you mentioned, I think the best tip is probably to work with someone that can empathize with what you're going through, because we only know what we know, right? So I think the line of communication has to be always open, talk and share. Smile more often, Walter. Don't yell at Tony. And then probably avoid those who are aggressive and trying to cause troubles, because there's no way that you can change other person.
Right, and it's really important that you better understand, because as we saw on the online post, there were so many compelling arguments. Each side I could completely relate to. So try to better understand. And that was our news feed for this Monday. Moving on to today's discussion. Now, remember the zebra that escaped from a zoo in Seoul and ran around the city streets? Ever since the male foal was placed back in his pen, people have started paying more attention to how animals are treated at zoos. So take a look at the screen to find out more. This is Sero. You may have seen him roaming around the streets of Seoul a few weeks back. The male zebra broke free from a children's zoo and galloped around residential neighborhoods in the capital for around 3 hours. Zookeepers later shared his backstory. It turned out the 3-year-old lost his parents earlier this year and has since been a little aggressive. Once Sero was returned to his pen, the zoo said it would try to bring in a female zebra he could mate with so that he's less lonely and therefore won't escape. But many criticized the move, saying this wasn't effective. Instead, they said zoos should look back at their safety measures and see whether their facilities are good enough for the animals there. Animal rights activists also chipped in, raising questions about whether animals should be locked up in pens for people to come and enjoy in the first place. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. How did the younger generation look at Sero the zebra's escape? What underlying issues did they pay attention to the most? 2. Sero's escape attracted attention on whether zoos should even still exist. What do young people think about zoos? 3. How has Sero's escape led to calls for more action and attention on better animal rights in the country? So back on March 23rd, videos of a zebra roaming around the streets of Seoul went viral on social media. And I remember rubbing my eyes to check if I was seeing this straight. And so before we go deeper into today's discussion topic, which has to do with whether zoos are suitable or a proper environment for animals, let's briefly cover what the zebra's day out of the zoo was like. Walter.
Yeah, well, I mean, it must have been fun for him, for a person who was, in this small enclosure. We know that he broke out of his wooden fence enclosure in Seoul's Children's Grand Park sometime in the afternoon. Now, he went roaming around the streets of Gwangjin district, as you can see right here. I mean,
oh, wow.
I mean, who hasn't wanted to run around on the road and looks scared, stiffless? But however, eventually he was caught. He was surrounded by police, rescue personnel and zookeepers and tranquilized and transported back to the zoo. At least he was following the road rules, right?
Yeah,
he was stopping there. But, we hear that this poor zebra at the moment isn't going through a great time. He's a bit angry. I mean, he's picked some fights with a kangaroo before, and as an Australian, don't pick fights with kangaroos. It's not a smart idea. But as we did hear, yes, his parents have passed away, so he is a bit upset these days.
Right, and I still can't imagine, I still can't believe that's true.
Yeah.
Seeing a zebra running loose in the streets of Seoul, at the time we're living right now, it was very shocking.
It honestly looks like computer-generated graphics.
I know,
to me,
it does.
Yeah.
And that's why, Cheska, a lot of people were so shocked to see this, and they went further by parodying his escape, and many foreign media outlets even covered his day around Seoul. So walk us through all these different reactions since Sero's loose.
Yes, so CNN and BBC even reported, quote unquote, a zebra on the loose. Definitely an uncommon, unimaginable happening, seeing a zebra running in the middle of Seoul City, one of the most metropolitan cities in the world, right? And what was even more interesting was how creative Koreans were, generating thousands of viral memes from these AI tools that were both very comical and meaningful. So there were some that was like Sero and the motorcycle, like otobai, and Sero speaking at the UN conference. And there's Sero walking on 2 feet, Sero the unicorn.
The picture we saw just before that was a man wearing a zebra costume. It wasn't even AI generated. So you could see the whole craze Sero has caused. But another aspect, and this is relatively a bit deeper, right, than what we've been seeing before, is that people paid attention to how zoos are treating animals like Sero, right? So tell us, Cheska, what was that part of the reaction? What did people look into when they thought of Sero and how zoos are taking care of their animals?
Because this was such an uncommon happening, it's understandable that there was a very lighthearted and enthusiastic reaction. However, I think this definitely shed light on a more serious matter to why Sero made the escape and what that sheds light on. So if we take a look at the screen, this is a survey of almost 4,000 Koreans through their 20s through 50s. And if you look, although all 3 reasons were of similar importance to the public, the top 2 were lack of care and attention from the zoo, and lack of appropriate living conditions for zebra currently at the zoo.
Right.
And when the follow-up question was asked about what the zoos could do to improve the conditions, the overwhelming top response was better care and treatment of animals, followed by also even considering wildlife shelter as an additional option. Now, only around 20% of the public thought that reducing the number of zoos as a possible solution.
That's why we saw a lot of people going to the zoos to see Sero, and some posted on their social media, Sero is so cute and person, they were really happy to see the zebra. But I personally was a little concerned to see this once freely galloping, male foal, now stuffed into a pen. So now I would like to ask you what your stances are when it comes to zoos, starting with Walter.
So I grew up in that generation where we weren't really educated of like how bad zoos can get. I mean, they were only done for entertainment purposes. We didn't think too much about the animals. Now we're hearing all these horror stories that are coming out, not just here in South Korea, but all over the world of mistreatment of animals, as well as, aquariums as well. I would like to believe that most zoos have good intentions. There are some good zoos out there that really want to care for the animals or conserve the animals. However, time after time we're hearing these terrible stories. But what I really hate are the petting zoos, where you take children and they pet the zoos, or even it is a big thing here in South Korea, the animal cafes.
That's true.
I don't like them either.
And that's solely for the purpose of entertainment for humans.
Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of animal rights activists and people who love animals like myself get really stressed out too to see these animals in such stress. But what about you, Cheska? What is your stance on zoos?
I agree with Walter. Mistreatment of animals anywhere and everywhere, whether it's zoos or even your home, is wrong, right? I personally am a proponent of wildlife shelters and, quote, properly certified zoos. Now, there's a serious need for oversight and patrol for how zoos take care of the animals. And I have seen that AZA, Association for Zoos and Aquariums, spend about $230 million on a conservation fieldwork. And due to heavy deforestation, climate change, and water pollution, there are increasing number of endangered species, and they need desperate sanctuaries, right? And zoos and wild shelters can actually serve as sanctuaries for these animals. And, I think it also serves as a reminder that humans living amongst the skyscraper jungle to be reminded of what we're part of and what we need to protect when we visit these shelters or see the zoos.
Definitely. And it's worth noting that there's three primary reasons or functions of zoos, right? It's for conservation, education, but also entertainment. But I think here in the studio, we feel like the entertainment factor should be taken down a notch. It should be more for conservation and education. And that's why a lot of pro-environmental activists are implementing digital technology. That's why we're seeing more virtual zoos to, better educate the public on what type of animals are there whilst protecting wild animals that need to be, back out in nature. So now we're going to be hearing from an animal rights activist to find out whether zoos out there are providing the best care and protection animals require and which direction we should be going. We're now going to include an animal rights activist from the UK. It's Abigail Forsyth, a campaign coordinator at the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals for Asia. Welcome, Abigail.
Hi, good morning.
All right, Abigail, I'd like to ask you the first question. So you saw the video of Sero, the zebra, escaping and running around Seoul, and it definitely garnered a lot of attention globally. What was your initial reaction when you saw this video?
I think that Sero's escape is a strong reminder to us that wild animals such as zebras do not belong in captivity, and they have the right to live their lives freely. And his actions really demonstrate the animals' desire for freedom and the need for them to exhibit their natural behaviors. And Seoul's Children's Grand Park, just like every other zoo, is a business for profit. They function to make money. They do not have the animals' welfare as priorities. So Sero's needs are not being met. As you mentioned before, since the death of his parents, he's been becoming increasingly agitated and aggressive. And his needs are not being met. He's been left living alone now, when in the wild he would be living in a group of at least 20 zebras. And this has led him to become increasingly unruly, and we urge the zoo to take immediate action to address the underlying reasons behind Sero's change in behaviour and to provide for him the care that he needs.
Right. Before I go on to the second question, what do you think about the zoo's reaction then? They said they would, match him up with the female zebra. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, zoos now focusing on breeding animals is really not the answer. We should be looking more at conservation of natural habitat instead of keeping animals caged.
All right. And now I would like to ask you how zoos are operated in the UK and whether the average level of awareness people have for animal rights is much higher compared to Korea. How is it like there?
I think in countries like the UK, we may have stronger animal welfare laws. However, we still have zoos with varying levels of animal welfare standards, and animals in captivity in establishments across the globe are still exhibiting the same signs of distress, anxiety and depression. Captive animals all around the world show signs of zoochosis, which is a repetitive action where animals can be seen swaying back and forth, and other actions that show that their needs are not being met. They are denied of everything that is natural to them. They have every aspect of their daily life controlled by humans. So no matter where you are in the world, in the UK or in Korea, zoos, even in the best of conditions, a lifetime behind bars is no life for an animal.
Then do you think zoos should be gone as a whole? And what do you think needs to be done to secure better animal rights at existing zoos?
Yeah, I mean, PETA is firmly opposed to keeping wild animals in captivity altogether. And especially as we emerge out of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think one thing that we have all recognized is that we do not like to have our freedom restricted, and the life of an animal in a zoo is exactly that. They are denied of all of their natural behaviors, and we should really be looking towards conservation of natural habitats and retiring animals to sanctuaries where they can have a more natural environment.
All right. Thank you so much, Abigail. It was a pleasure hearing from you and learning how instead of zoos, sanctuaries would be a better place for animals to freely roam in their natural habitat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now, Abigail from PETA mentioned a lot of great points. So I'm wondering what you thought about them, Cheska.
I really like the point that she made that conservation work is probably a top priority rather than keeping the animals in the zoo.
Right.
And I definitely agree with her. My only concern is that there's so much conservation work that needs to be done at the same time that deforestation and climate change is happening. So how do we sort of level the growing number of endangered species versus the sanctuaries that are disappearing?
Because as you mentioned before, that's one of the primary purposes of zoos, right? Conserving animals and making sure that the endangered species, live healthily and are there. But what about you, Walter? Any points that fascinated you?
Well, I just think it's really interesting that I come from a country that has one of the most vast amounts of, I guess, wildlife in the world, right? Australia. And we are very well known for a certain family who opens an Australian zoo who say that they're there for the conservation of animals. But then she mentioned that all zoos are businesses, and it really does make me think, who's doing the right thing? Are the zoos doing the right thing, or is it really just a business?
It's a very thin line, but what we can definitely say for sure is compared to the past, it has shifted from entertainment to education. I think that's why we're seeing more people like us raise awareness on what's happening. But why don't we now hear what our viewers have to say about zoos and Sero the zebra's escape? Take a look at the screen to find out what a few had to say. So PMGW said, I was security at a zoo in the UK, and I think they were the first zoo I've been to, where animals have much more freedom in terms of movement. The animals were fed 3 times a day or more. They had tons of room for movement, food, and recreational activities. Jiawei K said the zebra that escaped from the zoo, Sero, made me think of the movie Madagascar. Zoo animals escaping a New York zoo to go to Africa. That's true, and I think the zebra was there too.
They came to Seoul instead.
Exactly. And James C said, I'm in an African country, and when we do have zoos, although game parks are much more popular. 2 months ago, there were 2 escaped tigers which entered residential areas. One was euthanized, unfortunately, due to safety concerns, and the other successfully captured. Okay, so it's not only Sero that escaped, but a lot of places around the world, whether it be a movie or in real life, we're seeing animals on the loose. And that brings me to my question. What did you guys find fascinating among our viewers' comments?
I mean, all of them are very interesting, but PMGW's comment I loved because this also highlights that there are some zoos that are trying their very best to sort of keep the animals happy and also provide the best sanctuary for animals. I'm not saying all zoos are like that, but it's good to see an example of a zoo that is trying its best.
At least it's trying. And Walter?
Well, the Madagascar comment was very funny because it also reminded me of the movie Jumanji. So it's like Jumanji, and hopefully the zebra would go back. But yes, it was very comical at one point, but really that was a very scared animal on the loose. That's the thing.
Very much so, yeah.
And that's why I would like to now lead our discussion to the final thoughts. Let's wrap up by looking at what we hope for to seeing for like Sero and other animals at the zoo, starting with your thoughts, Cheska.
To be honest, while I was doing the research myself, I was educating myself on the realities of the zoo, and I actually came across a quote from a book that said, quote, "A good zoo is people making amends."
That's really nice.
I love that quote because I think, you know, animals and us, we're all co-inhabitants of this planet. And I would rather that the zoos try to protect and populate these animals rather than punish them for the wrongs that we have done. So I hope that the good zoos do exist, and maybe I'm being idealistic, but I do hope that it's out there.
I mean, I hope that hope continues and we do see some changes in reality. What about you, Walter?
Yeah, obviously I want to see, if we have to keep these zoos open, stricter regulations, obviously more open areas for the animals to run around in, because when you really think about it, they're just in these tiny, what you think is quite big, but very tiny areas, right? More common sense when talking about the rights of animals. I love animals so much. I hate to see them the way that they are, but I'm 100% against, and I'm sorry for the people who own these cafes or petting zoos, but you need to get rid of those petting zoos or cafes because I just think they're just horrible places to go. I mean, they're great for your Instagram shots. Look at me with a raccoon. But like at the end of the day, they're not good for the animals.
Right, and so we started today by looking at the popular zebra Sero that ran around downtown Seoul after escaping from his pen. We went then a bit deeper to talk about whether zoos are ethical. Our conclusion is that it could help educate the public and foster appreciation for other species, but zoos can also save endangered species by providing a safe environment. But now there are downsides, like animals suffering from boredom and confinement and the violation of the rights of individual animals, and they should be considered for better care at these places. Especially with digital technology, we could go to virtual zoos instead of actual zoos. Now, these are some solutions we have, but we're gonna wrap up because we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dain-hong.
Pleasure is always mine. Thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Always lovely to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.